Hello, welcome to SIGA's special session, Behind Closed Doors, Sexual Harassment and Discrimination in the Workplace. My name is Doris Cologne, and I'm the CEO of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, and I'll be your moderator today. And today, I am joined by three amazing women. Rebecca Khoury, founder and CEO of The Spirit of Trust, Ghislaine Dumont, 2004 beach volleyball Olympian, and Catherine Redmond, national expert in athlete violence prevention and response. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
So, Catherine, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work.
I got into this work because I was a freshman at the University of Nebraska, and I was raped the first week of my freshman year by one of the someone who would become the star football player, while two other athletes were watching and standing guard. I knew I couldn't report at that time. I knew what would happen to me even at the age of 18. Eventually, I found out about other women that this was happening to, and decided to file the first Title IX lawsuit that has to do with sexual assault on a university campus. So from that, I announced this organization, and I knew that athletic departments on campuses had a playbook that they operated from. And so I started this organization to bring awareness to it and to help other victims. And that was 25 years ago almost, or around. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
Wow. It is so very interesting to see how women in particular take something so traumatic and turn it into something to help others. And I have seen that across, and that is an amazing story. Rebecca, why don't we skip to you now? Tell us a little about you and Spirit of Trust.
Thank you, Doris. Listen, for me, I've been in amateur sport since I was 14 years old, and even when I was working full-time and I had other jobs, my family always said, your other jobs are actually your hobby, and sport is actually what's most important to you, and where your career is going to end up being. So, after living through years and years of going through being an athlete on the national squad and leading some of the federations in Canada as a president, CEO, I just decided a few years back when I left the Olympic movement at the national level in 2016 that I needed something more, and there was a huge gap in the sports system. And it was mainly around how people were treated and how organizations were governed, how leaders led. And it just kind of turned and evolved, and it became the Spirit of Trust, which is basically an organization that will want to focus the energy on finding support solutions and guidance for survivors of abuse in sport. And I'm still in the midst of making it happen and bringing it to action. But the main objective will be to support victims through connecting them to experts, as well as developing peer-to-peer and survivor-led activities and groups, because that's what I feel is most important, which happens naturally but should happen in a more organized and safe fashion. So that's it.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we'll talk a little bit about those gaps a little bit later. Ghislaine.
Yes. I am, like you said, I'm an Olympian in 2004, but on the beach. But before that, I played professional in Italy, in Japan, as a volleyball, traditional volleyball. And I was supposed to make the Olympic Games in '96. I decided not to do it because of an abusive coach. It was emotional and psychological abuse. And since I had been, professional athlete, and I was through the best in the best league in the world, I just knew at that point that that was abuse. And so I decided to quit, like to renounce to my Olympic dream in 96. And luckily, I kind of had a second chance. I stopped playing volleyball because after, and like a traditional volleyball, and started to do some beach volleyball. And so I ended up doing the Olympic Games in 2004. That would be too complicated to explain everything, but what came out of this Olympic was that I had a lot of attention on myself because I was 36 years old. I was a mom. My daughter was 3 years and a half, and was married to a coach, like a speed skating coach. And and I talked a little bit publicly about the abuse that I had with my coach, like on the indoor team. And from that, I had a lot of confidence from players, from coaches, from people that were saying, like in the system, some, abuses, sexual harassment, everything. So I kind of became, it's as if, like I say, that was written on in here, like, tell me what happened to you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, Catherine could say the same thing probably, but then I had that idea of creating an organization. That's what I did in 2015. I created Sportaid. I don't know if you know that organization, but now it's one of the best organization, but it like for helping, like the sorry about my it's not my first language, so but there's a helpline, for example, that was one of my idea, because and we did it based on the lack that I experienced as an athlete, and even after, because I tried to denounce as an adult, like for other athletes, but I couldn't have answers. So that's what I did. Like, I'll stop here. Thank you.
So each of you have kind of talked about some sort of gap or something that was missing when you started your organizations. And anyone jump in here. What do you think is the piece that, we all need to be focusing on right now when we think about sexual, emotional, physical abuse, particularly in sport? What is missing, and what should we really be focusing on as leaders in this space?
The institutional response, period. They become enablers instead of becoming advocates or protectors. Or even somebody that's looking out for the betterment of the sport. We see it time and time again in a number of sports where the governing bodies either do nothing, which would be the best case scenario for them, or they side with the offenders. They side with the perpetrators. Whether that's on a university campus, whether that's within a sports league or a sports governing body. The fact that there are so many enablers, and they are also unaccountable. So you have these layers of people that surround the perpetrator, that allow the perpetrator to commit the acts. And then these layers of power support and come around the perpetrator, while the victims become the ones who are vilified. And the crazy thing about that is that the victims are powerless. There's no response to it. There's no, is there a criminal investigation? No, not generally. So what's the remedy? What's the remedy? How do we get them to step up and not be enablers of abuse? That's a question I still seek. Do we pass more laws? It would be great to see laws passed, but then you have to deal with legislators who are lobbied heavily by the sports industry. So for regular athletes. And then you have some athletes who are also the enablers. Don't get me wrong, you have athletes who are also the enablers. So for victims to take any kind of stand, it comes at a very high personal cost and usually for not much return on their investment.
Well said.
I totally agree with you, Catherine. And I would add, well, while you were speaking, what just came up was, you know, we need to give power to the victims instead of, you know, even the justice, the system is you need to be a really tough person, like or well surrounded to go through the system. Like if you want to, you know, to go against your offender. So that's one thing. And it's a lot of education. And I think it has to go education through stories, you know, to make people understand what we, like I say we, because I've been through what I've been through with real, like people did, sometimes they don't imagine the impact that has on the victim, and why they don't speak out before, or why they stay with their abuser. So all those things, like people, like the public, not just the public, but people around needs to understand that, because the abuser or the people that are not victim, they know how to speak. They're good, you know, they're usually good, you know, in communication. And yeah, so we need to empower the victims. Well, the one that, and even the one that don't want to come up, like we need to educate them, because sometimes they don't know they're going through abuse, you know, like sexual, or like sexual, maybe it's easier to, but not always, like from what I've seen with what I have heard too. So that's all from my point of view.
Well, I think what you just touched on was grooming.
Yeah.
You know, and starting the victims out early. It's the frog in the boiling water. You know, it's very slow. They don't see it coming. They're usually very young. They're usually very manipulated, impressionable, powerless in that dynamic of coach player. For some, it might be athlete, and so you have a power dynamic there. And so you don't necessarily see it coming, and you're told that it's normal. You're told the behaviors are normal. And then as it worsens, you're told that you're actually the one doing it. You're actually the one perpetrating it. And for people to understand, it's like dealing with a psychopath, a sociopath mastermind that you release onto 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 14-year-olds, young women usually, or women who have previously been abused, where there's that gap that they struggle to recognize it, or they're looking for some security, they're looking for confidence. These people are expert at manipulation, at reading people, at getting what they want out of them. They're expert at that. And so I think that we really minimize, as a society, just how crafty and slick that a lot of these abuser coaches and a lot of even athletes are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about, you know, you mentioned accountability at the organizational level. And when you think about athletes to athlete, there's a level of accountability between athletes, right? Where do you see this industry going when it comes to really enforcing that accountability to make sure that there isn't this instance of victim blaming or acceptance of a culture that is basically toxic?
Where do I
Well,
see it?
I
Oh,
think
go
that
ahead, Rebecca.
no, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What I think is that, the solution is multi-pronged, because the problem is obviously quite complex. When you look at organization, you look at power differential, you look at the size of organization, the visibility, the media, you look at society in general, and then you have to have, where does the credibility come from, and what's the responsibility of the organization. So it's a really huge overhaul, right? And right now we have, the past is catching up to us, because we are getting into a phase of the world where people are speaking up, people are speaking out, they want to stand up for themselves. There's groups of men and women who are, connecting to find the solution, and the better way. So it's layered, and it's from different directions. I don't think that there's a one word answer, that's for sure, because it also deals with mental state, and when abuse, they don't necessarily speak out at the moment it happens, and then that creates a whole other array of questions and doubt, and but you should have said, and you should have done this and done that. So all these things that are kind of layering on top of each other, and then the money involved, and etc. So I think that at the end of the day, you have to we have to just try to unpack this as much as we can, continue the conversations, and develop multi-pronged approaches where people are educated on one hand, institutions are educated, and people who are in the system have ways to feel safe. And I really think at the end of the day that having somewhere, so legislation is the most powerful hammer, but also training, education, and then communication and awareness, and all of these things must happen together in order for society as a whole to advance. 10-15 years ago, we think, oh, this is normal, yeah, I can be talked down like this, I'm in the military with the boys, I should be okay, I'm tough, well, there are lines, and the lines need to be clearer, and the behavior needs to be explained, and people need to understand how people react, and how people are going to be maybe not able to express themselves so clearly as I tripped and I hurt my knee. The layers of complexities with the neurobiology of victims and all of these things, it's a lot to unpack. So I think that, yeah, it's a complex, it's definitely a complex thing to deal with. But I think education on all levels, awareness, the right tools and the right mechanisms to be able to report, to feel safe, the support around that, and the understanding, and the, how do you say in English, the destigmatizing, like being able and comfortable to speak about all kinds of things. And people need to understand that they need to behave better. And now everything is at the fingertips, and with the cameras, and with the smartphones, and we have to be just more conscious. And it all starts with education, but I think it has to be the right education with the right tools, the right information, and it needs to be practical, because it's one thing to check a list, it's a different thing to actually walk through a policy that you use, or going through disclosure, and understanding the ramifications of all of these things, whether as a leader of an organization or as a person who suffers from the abuse within the organization. And then it always depends which country you're in, and your level of maturity, your own circle of support, all these things. Yeah.
Well, I think
So I think
what you're describing is the first thing that I thought about was youth sports.
Mhm.
When you get to youth sports and know who your coaches are, be around your coaches, talk to your kids, educate your kids about
Right.
boundaries, about what is normal, about what is not normal. Start instilling in them early on
Right.
what is acceptable.
Yeah.
100%.
Have those conversations. I think what I've seen is really by the time that we start seeing an uptick in abuse, the groundwork has already been laid earlier on. I'm a lacrosse coach. I have always taken a lot of pride in the fact that my players come to me first with all kinds of issues, with issues regarding rape, with issues regarding sexual assault, where their schools didn't even handle it. They've come to me and said, Coach, what do I do? And I get involved. So I think we have to get to that level where coaches are seen as the first line of defense and not necessarily the first line of safety issues. So, and I do think in that area, legislation does help, because where do predators go?
Sure.
Who are the most vulnerable? They start making those entry points. And then at that time, they could be the greatest coach in the world, but they're abusive and they're abusing people and young kids, and the kids don't know enough, and the parents don't know enough. The parents may have boundary issues. The parents may have been victimized before. And when you think about it, especially here in the States, youth sports is so expensive. Everybody wants a sports scholarship. Everybody wants their child to be the next great player. And they pay ridiculous amounts for no accountability, for few background checks, if any. And yet there are travel squads, and the kids are going out traveling with these coaches. It's the foundation for it is, there are a lot of seeds, bad seeds, that have been planted in this area.
Catherine, piggybacking off of, coaches as the first line of defense. When you think about, all of you have or are coaches right now, right? And so when you think about the first line of defense in coaching, whether it be from youth sports all the way up to elite sports, what does that look like? What is it that, that coaches need or should be exposed to make sure that they can be in the position that you are with your lacrosse team?
Number one, background checks, first of all. Number two, an element of, again, the accountability, reaching out to parents, working with parents, going through trainings. Coaches should be going through trainings on this. I have been sent to trainings on penalties, referees, being a good sport, how to organize your team, best practices. None of them deal with abuse. There's nothing. And you're talking about, especially at the high school level, you're talking about kids that are ripe for the abuse. It is the sweet spot of age. Not a thing uttered about what's appropriate, what's not,
right,
where to report, what if this happens, how to talk to parents, educating the athletes themselves. Thankfully, because of my history and my position, my players are educated very quickly about what abuse looks like, about where to go, about who they can talk to, about who they shouldn't talk to.
Right.
To the point that they know that there's an open door and I'm a safe person.
Right.
But most of the time, that's not the case. That's something that's unique to me, but it's nothing that is mandated. It's there's a lot that can be done.
For sure.
And Catherine, because what you're saying and what Rebecca is saying, and I think we all agree on that. And when I created Sportaid in Quebec, that's what was the purpose of Sportaid, to educate, to sensibilize,
Right.
and to have a place like a helpline, so the victim, the parents, the coaches, or anybody that is around the athletes could phone and ask if that was normal. I'm not with the organization anymore because it's not going in the direction that I think it should go. But anyway, and but so that being said, that organization is there, but there's still many things that are missing, I think, and that's why I'm here. That's
Right.
why I'm with you guys today, because I think the victims, I'm one victim. You are, I've done what I've done, creating an organization. I'm not in that organization anymore, a little bit because of my background of being a victim. So, and my lack of support, because I'm a leader. I know that I'm a leader by default because I'm an Olympian. I've created what I created. I have the chance to being asked to be in the media, like in French, and and for me that's very important. And I always felt that I have a mission, like you guys probably, but to have a safe sport environment, that's for sure. And you said something that is very important, like starting young, I totally agree. And even before Sportaid, I worked in my speed skating club team. I was on the board, and I was the coordinator of all the coaches, because my daughter was young. And for me, it was important to show the coaches how to interact with the kids. And now, with 10, 15 years after, I would add what you just said, the boundaries, even because sometimes we're the coaches are 15 years old, coaching 12 years old girls, boys and girls, and they have sexual pulsion sexuelle. I don't know if you say that. And they have to be aware of that. If they're not aware, maybe they'll cross the boundary. If they are aware, and if an adult tell them that, you might feel, even have emotions or feel for an athlete, it doesn't mean that you're in love with it. Simple things like that. For me, it's if we start young, if we educate them well, and it doesn't have to be complicated,
Right.
So that's sorry, I become a little excited when I talk about that.
Did you find that in your particular circumstance that you had other teammates that were against you? Did you find that?
Yes. Yeah. I tried to talk to some teammates that were still on the team, for example, before I quit. But the coach gets rid of the players that, that he wasn't able to control. And because I was the best player in Canada, he couldn't get rid of me, He didn't have choice to, because I decided to come back. So, but even then I tried to, after a couple months, and I saw that he didn't change. So I tried to talk to other players, but they just think I was,
Well,
I
I
was,
think what you have there, the dynamic is the athletes are generally loyal, and coach generally reinforces the players, the athletes, as we're a team.
yeah,
We're a team, we're a family. So the one person that breaks the loyalty
yeah,
usually receives the backlash.
yeah,
And we need to get to a point where, hey, if we might be a family, we might be a team, that's wonderful, but where there's toxicity, we've got to get it out.
yes. I
Yeah.
tried so much to explain that. Well, not like what you're explaining is perfect, but that's what I felt inside of me, like
Right.
for me, it wasn't possible, even for the other players. It wasn't just for me. Like,
Right.
we couldn't be a team and performing at the Olympic Games in that toxic environment. I was, yeah. So,
Right.
but at that time, I was not at the same place where I am today. And, and hearing people like Rebecca or you or other people that I have been around in the last 5 years, like I learned so much, like I'm so much stronger. So that's why it's so important to try to surround the victims as much as we can, when they want to be part of, or when there's leaders. Yeah. So
Right. Right.
So a lot of the focus when it comes to athlete safety is around sexual abuse and misconduct prevention. But one of the things I think has been overlooked for some time, and we're starting to see it pop up in the news quite a bit, is the emotional abuse that you speak of, Ghislaine. So talk to us a little bit about, when you think of your interactions and what could have been different, whether it be the retaliation by the team or the instruction by the coach. That emotional piece can sometimes be forgotten. So if you could kind of share with us a little bit about, from your perspective, how do we get coaches and how do we get teams to really recognize that that is just as important to a safe and just a sporting environment that's positive for athletes, regardless of their age?
yeah, that's a good question, because I think, one athlete could accept some kind of abuse, and another athlete with the same coach would not accept it. So that's where I say there's like tone of the gray line is that's the hardest to define. But there's like in emotional abuse, there's some things that are very clear to me, like even if it's said to someone that can take it, it
Right.
doesn't mean that when he goes back or when in 10 years he will be as tough as he is at that time. So like I don't know, like I think that touches me very much, what you're asking me. I just think it's a matter of respect, but defining what respect is, like, because for some people it's, like Catherine said, like the loyalty toward the coach gave the coach so much power. And I think the coach should be aware that he has that power, because like Catherine said before, there's like most of the coaches, my husband is one of the best coach in Canada in the speed skating. And they're good. They have good intention. And most of them, if not all of them, have good intention, but doesn't mean that they have good intention that the impact will be positive. So it's like, I don't know if I'm answering your question. Maybe Rebecca or Catherine has something to add, but it's really tough because I've, like, even as before being a player, being an athlete, I was, abused in my own family. My dad was violent. So when I was first being around abusive coaches, when I was maybe 14 years old, 13 years old, I didn't know that they were. So, and then I went on and I went playing professional in Italy, and I had a couple good coach, but playing professional in Italy for 7 years, where I was treated like a good, like a normal person. And if I hurt myself, they would sit me on the bench. I couldn't understand that, they would. So that's where I learned how to be respected. And I started to read books, and I was really curious. I was curious because I was very full of emotion. I would react like sometimes when I would make a mistake, I was overreact. So that would kind of put, like, the coaches would, would try to make me a good volleyball player by not reacting so much. So it's like I know that I'm saying a lot of things, but it's complex, I think. But it all comes down to maybe determine the gray zone, like,
Mhm, mhm.
and
Right.
and how to spot an athlete that has a potential, maybe back, like, even family background,
Mhm.
that, abusive family background, vulnerability, like,
Mhm.
all kind, so I don't know, that's what I have to say. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Right.
No, I think
Right.
you hit on a lot of good things. Rebecca, when you think about all of this, and particularly have you focus on this holistic approach, how does that sort of fit in? Because the word of the day, I think, is complex, and there is not one solution.
100%.
Yeah.
And there's not one solution, and there's also not one angle to the problem. The problem being complex requires an array of solutions, and it's what we call, right, the multi-prong approach, right? So you have to hit it from various points in order to look at the prevention piece, and how does the prevention piece happen with more education, better screening first, but better and thorough and complete screening. And then it's about education, which is education on your own policies, and education on what is abuse and what are the solutions. And then it's education on also acceptance of these issues, and services for the victims, the survivors. And it's also about the right policies being enforceable, etc. And organizations like the one that you lead, which is having an independent piece, but try to connect all these pieces together so it makes sense for a country and a way to move forward. But I think at the end of the day, the piece that Guylaine was talking about, and one of the big piece of prevention that we started to think about a lot more, was to look at the adverse childhood experiences, and to basically take the ACEs and take the ACE score, and include that, find a way to embed that into the medical checkup, and everything around what's happening in sport. Because having that information of where your athletes come from and their background, I think, is an important piece. So the same way that we do their physical checkup, we should also know what their mental checkup is, and what their home environment was when they were kids, and what their ACE score is. And the ACE score, as you know, has the component of violence and abuse, as well as the component of the household dysfunction. So we can decide to make that evolve and say, let's try and also do an ACE score for sports, and try to assess, was the abuse in a sporting environment, or was it in a household environment? and all these pieces. And that's actually a piece that we're working with Dr. Yetsa Tuakli from the Sport Equity Lab. And it's a discussion we've been having, her and I, for a little bit, because we feel that that's a big piece of prevention, and it's scientific. It's like we can actually use concrete research and data and see what they're doing in California, and then see how can we bring this to the sporting environment, certainly to the colleges and to environments that have really structured medical support, etc., like the college, like the Olympic teams, like the professional teams. No doubt that to me is a no-brainer. Of course, the younger sports, youth sports, community sports, that's definitely a different thing. But I think also so knowing where your people come from basically is an important start. And then being able to train your coaches and everybody around them to be better people and to just be more aware. And knowledge is power at the end of the day. So when you know where you can turn to, you're not going to get as manipulated as if you don't know, because then you assume. And so just putting things out there, being transparent on systems and policies, and then training the people around the athletes and parents, like you're doing with the modules that you have that parents can listen to and should do, because they need to know what to look for, and Catherine, nailed that point as well. Like the parents, it's an important piece. My own dad, I will tell him stories and he's like, but Rebecca, where were the parents? And I go, Dad, it's not so simple, but he gets so like, he's like, but how did they miss this? I said, well, they don't know. Maybe they have a background of abuse. Maybe their own boundaries are shifted. Maybe, it could be a whole, maybe they're not there because they're working 3 jobs to have this kid do this amazing sport. So all of these things, but so yeah, I think education and proper education and making sure that the approaches are connected, the connection of the different pieces is a really important. We tend to do things in silos. And I've always said from 15-20 years ago, I always talk about, you have to envision this as a cobweb and all the pieces affect the others. And you have to just do it all together. Administrators, if they're not trauma informed, they're not going to know how to handle a discipline complaint. The same way as coaches and people around the athlete, if they're not trauma informed, they won't see the signs. They won't understand a disclosure. They're not equipped for that. If the teammates are not, same story, right? And so all the people in the organization need to have that level of knowledge and information, and they also need to know where to turn. Those are the main things. So yeah.
I could listen to you all talk all day long, because this is my jam here, but we're almost out of time. So I want to give you guys just a few moments just to close out. Any final thoughts as we think about sexual harassment, we think about abuse in sport, any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with? Catherine, I'll start with you.
My first thought from all of this, if you just break it down to the bare minimum, it's listen to the victims. Listen to them, give them support, investigate the issues that they're talking about. And listening is whether you're a teammate, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're, no matter what your area is, you have to listen to the victims. And I think from going on what Rebecca was saying and Guylaine was saying, there are so many times that we squash that voice, that we overpower that voice, that we tell that voice to get in line, that we enforce the institutional response as players, as coaches, as parents. And at the end of the day, every single time, we need to listen and respect the voice of the victims. And I think what we have done instead is normalize the voice of the perpetrators and the enablers.
Spot on. Guylaine?
I think what Rebecca said, educate the administrator on the trauma effect, and they will be able to listen to the victim more. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. And Rebecca, any final thoughts?
Well, yes, I think that, you know, the people who are listening to this are in the world of sport, and they're either a leader or a leader becoming, right? And so I think that at the end of the day, you have to make sure that, you know, the main call to action is what's protecting you? What's the environment in your organization? Where do you see gaps? And make sure that you include the voice of the survivors in your reflection, in your analysis, in your audit, in your solution. And as the leader of an organization, you have to, your duty of care is the duty to your people. And your duty of loyalty is also the duty to your people. And you have to make sure that you audit your organization, that everyone is trauma informed, and that all your policies are enforceable and they can be actionable, and that you are, like Catherine said, listening, respecting, believing. You know, no one is waking up one day making up crap. It's very simple. It's less than 3%. All the research tells us this. So chances are they're not. And so you have to really change your mindset and be courageous and brave and embrace your role as a role model, whether institutionally or individually, you know, and just be on the right side of history.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for this discussion. This has been very eye-opening, and I hope the viewers thought so as well. Also, one of the reasons that SIGA is developing the fourth set of universal standards on youth development and child protection in sports. So I'm sure you will hear more from SIGA on this topic. So thank you.